Good morning. One or two ladies. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is James Butler. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at Social Enterprise. And may I congratulate you on your choice of workshop. Not only is it by far the most interesting workshop this morning, we've got by far the most interesting and distinguished panel. Immediately to my left, we have Rosie Jolly. She has 23 years experience in the sector. She's CEO of Social Enterprise Network. She's also the mayoral lead on social value, amongst other things, in Liverpool. Next left is Roberta Blackman-Woods MP. She's MP for the City of Durham. Before she was an MP, she was a distinguished academic, and she's also Shadow Minister, I beg your pardon, for... Alas. She's Shadow Minister for Communities and Local Government with responsibility for all things P's, planning, public health, pubs and procurement.
Pubs.
Yes.
And on the far left we have Sarah, I beg your pardon, Chair of BSEC. She's Chief Exec of the ISC, who help over 200 social enterprises across Birmingham. She is an expert in commissioning and procurement. She's worked very hard on Digbeth Social Enterprise Quarter, which is an extraordinary, I think it's an incubator, the right word, which has got over 50 social enterprises helping regenerate the area. Just a final thing, as to social enterprise UK point, we're often criticised for being London-centric, and that's sometimes a little bit fair. So I'm delighted to have three distinguished speakers who can speak about social enterprise, not just in London, but throughout the north of England, and I'm delighted for that. So Roberta, if you'd like to kick off.
Yeah, and thank you very much. It's really great to be here today. I just want to sort of start off by explaining that before I was in the Shadow Communities and Local Government team, I was a Shadow Minister in the Cabinet Office and actually had responsibility for Big Society. And I thought I would mention that because I wondered how many of you actually remembered that as a concept. And part of the work that I did there was actually to collaborate with Chris White, who put the Social Value Act through, and we did that on a cross-party basis, and we did that, I think, because we had a sort of common determination that we would make sure that more of the public spend went to social enterprise, but also went to local communities. And so it was really interesting when I then moved over to communities and local government and got planning and procurement. I thought, actually, here might be an opportunity to use procurement and the whole commissioning agenda to try and deliver more for local communities that I felt, and we are talking now about 2011, 2012, were really suffering dreadfully from recession and cuts to local government. And it was really interesting because, and all of you will know this, that as soon as you mention procurement, people just glaze over. And so I would go around saying to people, I think we need to do something on procurement. I think this is really exciting possibility. And they would just look at me as if, I had two heads. And it probably would have remained like that, except somebody asked me to come and talk to a body that I didn't know existed, which was the Procurement Officers Association. And these were procurement officers in local government. And I went to their conference in the Barbican, and actually they were going through examples of best practice in local government and how they could use procurement to really deliver for their local areas. And I sort of ran up to the person at the end and said, this is exactly what I want to do. And so he said, well, we're not exactly sure what's happening across local government with regard to commissioning. So my office decided in 2012 to write to every single local authority in the country to ask them for a copy of their procurement policy and to ask how many of them applied the Social Value Act and how many of them had clauses within the procurement policy that enabled them to prioritise local providers or to invest in local social enterprises or to deliver on any of the other aspects of the Social Value Act. And actually we were really surprised at, so we sent out about 400 of these requests. We got 280 back within 2 weeks, which we thought was really good. And after a bit of pushing, we got it up to about 320. And at that time, less than a third had made any reference at all to the Social Value Act. And hardly any of them had any clauses about local suppliers. There were a few outliers, and the outliers were Birmingham and Sheffield and Liverpool. And so we did really a round of visits talking to the key people in the procurement teams. I mean, Birmingham, I have to say, were absolutely amazing in that way before anybody else, they seemed to say to themselves, look, we're going to deliver for this community. We're going to take the Social Value Act and really run with it. And if somebody wants to challenge us on the whole sort of European agenda, let them come and do it. And so we actually went to see, they were building a new hostel, at least one of their housing associations was building a new hostel for homeless people. They ensured that young homeless people were given apprenticeships as part of that project. They were then moved on to full-time employment, and they were tracking this all the way through. They also ensured that some of the people who would be managing that hostel when it opened were not only local, but local people who had previously been unemployed, who were put on training courses. I mean, they had just example after example that was really good, and a very, very imaginative use of procurement and commissioning to deliver not only for the local community, but for people who were really finding it very hard to get a start. And I should say we came across examples like that. In Liverpool, there were some, again, really good examples we got in the care sector, and I'm going to talk about Durham in a moment or two. But what was really interesting whenever we went round, because we also went around some of the authorities that didn't do anything, and that actually, I should say, we got curt notes from a few of them saying, that this was typical, of somebody sitting in Westminster, didn't understand local government. Of course, they couldn't apply the sort of things we were asking because didn't we know about European legislation? European legislation stopped them from having any sort of priority for local delivery or local providers. And I have to say, I just wanted to weep. And some of the teams who we met in local government is very interesting because the procurement officers and whoever was the lead member for procurement wanted to do more locally, and it was generally the legal team who were coming in and saying, you can't do this, no, I'm sorry, you can't do this, and you can't ensure that you put one local supplier on the list, the tendering list, and you can't, and it's really, what we did then, we got the good examples from Birmingham and Liverpool and Sheffield and sent them back to all of them and said, actually, you can do this. And Birmingham's been doing this for a while with no real challenge. And you can do a number of things. You can break up your contracts, local authorities, so they're coming in under the European threshold. And that's one thing you can do. There is nothing to stop you applying the Social Value Act and ensuring that local communities are going to get something out of your commissioning and procurement. And you can go out and you can talk to your local construction companies, you can talk to your local care providers. We came across a really, really good example of, and this was actually in one of the London boroughs, so sorry to bring it back to London, but I'm sure this happens in other places now, for their school meals contract, who were ensuring that the local providers of school meals were employing local women, that they were pushing them to pay a living wage, and sorry, it was women. But I'm sure they've extended that now. But it was really good how they were using that contract again to deliver for the local area. And so we sort of thought, well, this is good, we'll try and share best practice. And then I've been sort of going around various local authority forums talking about how they could do this and, you know, who are the people to learn from. And it's really interesting because we redid the survey just at the beginning of this year, and we were really pleased to find that now just over half of local authorities, well, for a start, there seems to be far more knowledge about the Social Value Act and how it can be used. And I guess that's just time and individual authorities learning from each other. So it's gone up to over half. But one of the other interesting things that's happened that I wanted to talk about is some of the most imaginative work is being done with those local authorities that have had the biggest cuts. And that's because they've had to think about doing things differently. And they are also obviously witnessing a limited range of opportunities in some areas for local people to find employment. And so again, they've had to be really imaginative about how they're using their own commissioning and their own procurement processes to deliver for the community. And so when we first went to speak to Durham, Durham is one of the ones, as my own authority, that gave me a lecture on how they most certainly couldn't apply any of the things I was asking them for. And the head of legal services said to me, you know, that they'd been taken to court about 5 years ago. So this is way, you know, before the Social Value Act, for not doing a procurement exercise properly, and it had cost them X number of pounds. And I sort of queried it. And it was because they hadn't produced the documents in the right order. They hadn't advertised the documents in the right order. It had nothing to do with what I was talking to them about. And I just said, oh, this is ridiculous. Here's Birmingham, here's Liverpool, here's Sheffield, you know, and you've got a huge budget, Durham, in a very deprived area. And it's really interesting because now one of the And they sort of said to me, well, we're looking about what we might do about apprenticeships. We think we might be able to do something about that. And I said, well, of course you can, because lots of people are doing it. So now they've come up with a number of different schemes, but they're at the moment they've got a stock transfer going on in terms of their housing stock. And one of the things they've been looking at is how to ensure that the housing associations really deliver on the Social Value Act, who are going to take over the management and the maintenance, and that's the really important thing, the maintenance of that stock. So obviously there will be 2P for a while, but then it's about getting really, really, you know, good quality jobs and local providers into delivering those maintenance services. They've also been working with a consortia of small and medium-sized construction companies to see how, whenever planning permission is given, for example, they can encourage large developers to subcontract or break up the sites, so some of the smaller and medium-sized companies can get access to those sites. That's been a really interesting process, using the planning system to deliver for local providers. And of course, one of the big things that I'm now asking them to do, but we haven't yet got very far with, but if you've got examples I'd like to hear from it, is how we can use local procurement through social care to really drive up standards in the care sector, not only standards of care, but the quality of jobs that the whole care sector gives. So that's my sort of next thing that's on the agenda for local authorities. But I just wanted to share some of my thoughts with you, and that I think things are changing in local government. I don't think they've changed enough, but there are some really, really good local authorities that are really showing the way, really being imaginative in their use of the Social Value Act, with really good local partnerships. And I think the others are going to talk more about the local partnerships that are seeking to use the money that local government has to deliver for its local communities, and I think that's what we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosie?
Okay. I feel very privileged to have both of these roles. Imagine being the Chief Executive Social Enterprise Network and having the remit to actually go out there and talk legitimately all the time about social value. Very, very privileged indeed. Just a quick bit about Social Enterprise Network, who we are. We were established in 2000 by the sector, for the sector. And we've got about 800 social enterprise members, but on top of that we've got about 210 associate members who are friends of social enterprise, private sector, businesses with a social conscience. We're an open, democratic, member-led organisation, and like any other social enterprise business, any profit we make is reinvested back into the business. Just before I move on to talk about some of the stuff we've been doing in Liverpool, I think it's important that you understand some of the context around the challenges that Liverpool has actually got. We've currently got a population of about 469,700, and employment, all age groups, is around 226,383. But if you look at the worklessness statistics of 18.9 against the national average, you can see some of the tensions that we've got. And at the moment, across the whole of the Liverpool City region, there's a deficit of around 18,500 businesses. And in Liverpool alone, we've probably got a deficit of just over 6,000 businesses. So we've got some real challenges in terms of the local economy. Add to that the fact that we've got the highest, in the city of Liverpool, the highest cancer-related deaths. The life expectancy level for both men and women is comparatively lower than the national average. And Merseyside is the food poverty capital of the UK. Last year, there was over 56,000 people had to use food banks, and I think somewhere on there it says something in about, I think it worked out about 4 people every minute or something like that. And despite all the investment that Liverpool has had over the last decade, we still remain to be the most deprived core city in the UK. It was interesting that Roberta mentioned that some of the cities that are actually doing something with the Social Value Act are the very cities that have been disproportionately affected by central government cuts. And again, to put some context around that, it's just to sort of show you that since 2010, Liverpool as a city, that doesn't take into account the other local authorities across Merseyside, has lost £176 million from its budget. But between 2014, the city will lose another £156 million from its budget. And of course, on top of that, we've actually got less EU funding coming into the region in the next round. We were expecting something like 475 million, and we've actually got 221 million. So I hope you can appreciate some of the challenges that we've got. And what that means in real terms for a city like Liverpool is that we're now in the position where we're going to lose non-mandatory services. A lot of services have been reduced and some services lost. For the first time, the city of Liverpool is having to make statutory redundancies from the public services. And we're having to think differently, so we're looking at things like redesigning services, and there's a greater dependence on the third sector. But I have to say, the greater dependence on the third sector comes with a bit of a warning, because social enterprise has been put on a bit of a pedestal over the last few years, but it is not the panacea and the cure-all to all the public services ills. So, you know, whilst there is an expectation that we'll be there to pick everything up, we have to have the skills, capacity, resources, and desire to do all of that. So I'm not going to talk about the Social Value Act because you know exactly what that is. But we talked about definition this morning when the keynote speakers made their presentations. And what we've actually done in Liverpool is we've come up with a local definition of what social value means to the city. And it's a bit long-winded, and it's a bit of a work in progress, But basically what we're saying is that social value for Liverpool is a community-focused benefit which adds to the widely defined well-being of the city's population over and above the usual added value associated with public sector contracts, one which embraces all market sectors and commissioning within and between sectors and directly changes the city's approach and response to its people and its communities. So that's what social value means to the city. And as a result of that, what we're doing is we're taking the Social Value Act and saying, you know what, we can do so much more with this. We're going to create a social value city. And what we've done is we've tried to link all the work that we do through Social Enterprise Network and all the work that I do through my mayoral role around some of the mayor's outcomes for the city, which is around building new schools, making Liverpool business and enterprise friendly, creating 20,000 local jobs and making the city greener, cleaner and healthier. And in addition, building 5,000 new homes, and that's affordable housing. So as I say, we're going to become a social value city. We're looking at how we use social value as a lever to grow the local economy, reduce the impact on the public sector, and actually look as a city about what skills, resources and capacity have we got that we can actually maximise more to create local jobs and to stimulate procurement through local supply chains. So a couple of examples of some of the work that we've been doing. Well, we've got the Friendly Economy model, which is a multidisciplinary group of people who have skills, who have capacity, who have resources to do things differently in the city. And the example I'm going to quickly give you is the Hilton Hotel. Now, if I say the words Hilton, what does it mean? What do you think of when you say Hilton Hotel? Paris? Come on. Not Paris Hilton, the Hilton Hotel. Anybody else?
Large business.
Large business, posh, expensive. Yeah? That's what most people think. Well, I know the manager of the Liverpool Hilton quite well now, and I actually said to him, and we were talking about social value because they actually get it. They're doing a lot of work around social value in terms of how new people coming to work for the business actually are enabled to make that sustainable. They're paying for their transport to work and things like that until they get the first paycheck when they come off JSA. So I said to him, so if we had a woman who was fleeing domestic violence and the refuge was full, would you, as part of your social value commitment to the city, if you had capacity in your hotel, give that woman a bed for the night? And what did he say? Absolutely. Now, if he can do it at the Hilton in Liverpool, so can every other hotel across the city. And that's what the friendly economy is. That's the way that we're going to try and do things differently. And we've tested that out. As SEN, we've actually tested that model out as well. So if we've been delivering a conference, we've sort of said, can we use your facilities and we'll purchase the tea and coffee and food if you give us the venue itself free? And as part of social value commitment, that kind of exchange has been happening. So it's a different approach to making what few resources we have go that little bit further. The City Council has completely changed the way that it looks at things. With our help, they're not applying social value just to contracts over £173,000. All contracts have a social value element in them. I don't think there's many across the country that are actually doing that, but we've applied it right across the board. And we've also introduced spot buying as well as a concept. So one of the frustrations that I think I had and many colleagues across the sector was that when a contract became available within the City Council or within most councils across Merseyside, it was usually dependent on the commissioner picking up the phone to the first three favourite businesses and saying, do you want to send a tender in? Not anymore. And the other good thing about that is it's not just being advertised through things like the Chest, which is the Northwest Procurement Portal. It's been advertised through our network, it's been advertised through the Chamber. They're now utilising different mechanisms to get contract opportunities out there in the public domain. The other thing that's been happening is market development. How many of you in this room have received a tender specification and thought, who's going to deliver that? There isn't enough money in it. Who's written this? Yeah? I can see some faces, so I know you know what I'm talking about. In Liverpool, not just with the council now, with housing, they are starting to do not only market development where we recognise we've got a gap, but actually doing market engagement to shape specifications. And one piece of really good news that happened a couple of months ago is one of our local housing associations are working to deliver a joint tender specification with the City Council for something that they both need to procure, but we're going to do it separately. Spending two lots of money just didn't make sense. Now it's one contract, two procurement managers working together to make sure that we can derive better value. And the other thing that's been happening is we've reviewed and made recommendations and changes to the standing orders. And again, that was something that was driven with my mayoral lead role on. So all the things that you all find difficult when you get those massive specifications, things like barriers with insurance, it's never retrospective, is it? It always says you've got to have 10 million of this and 10 million of that and 10 million of the other. And the reality is that you only actually carry the levels of insurance that you need at that time. And in the past, there's been no flexibility to actually increase the insurance levels once you get the contract. In Liverpool, that now happens. So some of the barriers for small businesses, irrespective of whether you're in the private sector or the third sector, we're trying to break those down. I've had a social value think tank, a multidisciplinary, multi-agency think tank that's been working together, which is made up of public, private and third sector to develop a social value charter that goes live, hopefully before the end of March. I'm now a member of the national steering group, which is working on the social value portal, and we've got Guy Battle here with us this morning. And one of my triumphs as a councillor and mayoral lead came in 2014 in July, when I actually got a motion passed, unanimously supported by full council in Liverpool, to make buy local, buy social a default position for Liverpool City Council procurement. Okay, that was a momentous moment in my political and professional career to actually be able to do that. Because now, unless there's a very good reason why we have to procure things outside the city, everything should be procured locally. But I accept that there are some benefits to procuring things outside, and there might be some mutual benefit, and I accept that. But in the main, we need to be buying local. So we've got a Buy Local, Buy Social campaign. We've signed up to the SE UK Buy Social campaign. We have a badge somewhere, but I think I've lost it today. And we're doing some significant work with some big organisations like Everton Football Club, the Liverpool Hospital and the Hilton. Because what we're trying to do is create the evidence base to go out there to other businesses across the city to say, this is how you can do social value. So we're working with these three here to look at their supply chains and how they can redirect some of their flexible spend, if you will, back into the local economy. And we've had some really good commitments from Everton Football Club, who, when you remove things like the player and management salaries, have still got something like 27 million that they can spend locally if they choose to. And Liverpool Hospital, the chief executive there wants to try and get at least 50 to 70% of the flexible spend back into the local economy. So that'll be a major achievement, particularly in international festival business. So what we've been pushing in Liverpool, on top of everything else that we've been doing, is something called 10% more for social value. And it's about looking at the inward investment potential of social value. And we've done some rough calculations, and if 6 businesses in the city with a spend of between 100,000 and 100 million increase their local spend, and we're not asking them to spend any more, but just redirect it basically, 10% locally, it would mean an additional £5.5 million into the local economy, and it would mean the equivalent of about 231 full-time jobs. If we scale that up to 200 businesses, this is just in the city, the difference is something like 58.5 million into the local economy and 2,418 full-time equivalent jobs. Just 10%. Not a big ask, is it? Huh? If we brought that out across the whole of the Liverpool City region, we're talking 58 billion into the local economy. Just by asking people to think differently about where they spend their money, just like the City Council has done. But the beauty of this is not just talking to the business, it's then educating the business to start to talk to their suppliers where they're spending their money as well. So the approach has been gaining traction for quite some time. The Cabinet Office have been interested in the work we've been doing, as have Social Enterprise UK, and I regularly speak to Nick Temple about what we've been doing. And as I say, we're starting to create those local case studies about some of the work so that we can encourage others to do the same. And I was quite pleased this morning to hear two things. One was Adrian Ringrose say, big business needs to do more. Well, equally, small business does as well. I've got a team of 4 staff, and I can honestly say the biggest event we do every year is an awards ceremony. But last year I could stand up and say, we've procured a local AV company, we've procured a social enterprise caterer, we've procured a local venue. So we live by our convictions. My usual style at these kind of events is to really end with a bit of a call to action. And I guess that the reason why we've been able to do things in Liverpool is because I'm the CEO of Social Enterprise, so I've got the knowledge, but also I've got the remit from the Mayor. And it really does take somebody at a local level to drive the agenda. So I challenge you all to go back to your local authorities and ask who is leading on social value. Who is leading in the council on social value? Who is leading in health on social value? Because if you don't, people will still not take any interest in this, and it has such massive potential to make a difference to the local communities that really don't deserve, what's coming with the cuts and everything else that we're having to face. So you guys go out there and be the social value champions of the UK. Thank you.
Sarah, over to you.
Yes, I think we're just going to wait for someone to just come in and sort out. Shall I just see if it's there? Is the chat PowerPoint?
That's great.
It's opposite.
Give this a hiatus. We're just overcoming technical issues. I don't know about you, but I'm inspired already, so I can't wait to see what Sarah has to say.
I'm just trying to get a flavour. Apologies for my absence. I designed a marvellous PowerPoint presentation for you today, but it's at a slightly different scale, so they couldn't run consecutively. So apologies for that. Right, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Sarah Crawley. I run an organisation called ISE. We're based in Birmingham. We've done a lot of work in terms of commissioning procurement, and we've done a lot of work in terms of social enterprise development. And I think that they link really well in terms of social value. And I just want to tell you a couple of stories, one really short story and one much longer story about the work that we've been doing, and I'm hoping you're going to find it really interesting. So the two stories are that we've been doing an amazing piece of strategic work as a social enterprise development organisation. I'm proud to say that I am chair of BSEC, the Birmingham and Solihull Social Enterprise Consortium, and we won some money from Barry Cadbury way before the Act actually came into place, or just before then, because what we wanted to do was to understand what the impact of the Social Value Act was going to be on organisations and how they should well, it's obviously social enterprises, and how they should respond to them. And in that role, we work very closely with Birmingham City Council, in partnership, collaborating, which is the real theme for my presentation today, with the procurement experts in the City Council, and we help them to develop their social value policy. So it really was grassroots work, and I think it reflects the comments that were made earlier on in terms of that we understand what social value potentially can be created, but also what difference it makes to Birmingham. What I need to say about Birmingham is that the cuts that are facing Birmingham are larger probably than any other local authority. The cuts per household for Birmingham are £147 per household over the next year, and the average cuts per local authority are £42. So you can understand that actually really begins to change services and how services are to be delivered. And it really does create challenges for people who don't like change, because I think we're used to delivering things in the way we've always done it, rather than thinking outside the box. But I think that Birmingham City Council and procurement have used the opportunity to encourage organisations who are getting involved in tendering to think about how they're going to do it differently, but also how they're going to partner other organisations. So you'll see there it's quite tightly written that we've developed something called, or Birmingham have developed something called the Birmingham Business Charter for Social Responsibility. And within that, everybody who is putting in any kind of tender has to sign up to this charter, and they have to declare within that not only the social value that they are creating with that contract that's going to be delivered, but additional social value. So for example, an organisation that was doing, I think, winning a stationery contract had quite a lot of vans. And within the charter they said they would support third sector organisations, and that they could provide some access to transport. So what happened as a result of them being part of the charter was that they gave a van that they no longer needed to a food bank that didn't have a van and couldn't deliver out food to the places where the community needed it. So the impact was win-win. The van was recycled, the food bank was able to get out to the community, and those people who were in need of that food got access to that food. And that's just a very small example of the kinds of things that's happening. And there's lots of things happening in terms of employment, and that's been going on actually for some time, pre the Social Value Act. But also whereby we're seeing a lot more sponsorship, we're seeing a lot more collaboration, we're seeing organisations coming to us who are corporate saying, how can we work with your sector? How can we do things differently? For example, if we're having an event, we can provide portaloos. If we're having training session, we might provide trainers, buildings, access to buildings, all sorts of different things like that. I think it's still to play out. I think it's very, very early stages. And I think, and I'm going to come back to it again, we've still got an issue around how you measure that impact, because at the moment I think it's all, you've got these offers and we also need to link up the offers with the organisations. So that's a really interesting piece of work, and I'm really happy to talk about that in questions, if you've got any questions about it. But the other thing I want to talk about, and it's in that same context of collaboration and community development, is the Digbeth Social Enterprise Quarter. And that's something that I'm really proud of, and I'm so excited that I've been able to come and talk to you about it today. Digbeth is the place where my offices are based. And it's a small area that's just on the outskirts of Birmingham City Centre. It's got high levels of social deprivation, high levels of unemployment. There's no connection between the people who are there. So there's a very busy nightlife, that doesn't connect with anything that happens in the day. There's small businesses, manufacturing businesses, there's lots of empty factories, units and so on. Lots of litter, not a very safe place at times, particularly at night. So, you know, it's an area where it's just not connected up at all. And I think, and what I want to say next is really important in terms of that context, because of the cuts, within my organisation, I had to really think about how I was going to continue to grow and develop social enterprises. How was that going to happen in the future? We lost 4 contracts by 2011 in terms of doing that delivery work, so we needed to do things differently. And I thought, well, I looked around and I thought, well, one of the easiest ways to do it is peer support and collaboration. So I looked around and thought, there seem to be quite a lot of social enterprises around here. And because we've got a Birmingham-based remit, we've never really looked very much at our local community. And we began to look at them and think, well, we could do some social enterprise walks. We could take organisations that are interested in starting social enterprise, or individuals who are interested in starting a social enterprise, and take them around the area, and they can meet those social entrepreneurs that are doing amazing things. So I did a bit of a mapping. First mapping, 27 social enterprises within a square mile of where we were based, which is, we thought, wow, that's really amazing. And we thought, oh, that's really good. And we got some political interest. So we got the leader of Birmingham City Council, Sir Albert Board, to come down, and I said to him, there's a pearl in your crown here. You've got these organisations here. They are doing all this social value that nobody knows about, because they're doing all sorts of different kinds of things. What can we do really to get this going, get this moving? And as a result of that, the next time we met, we talked about getting involved in the Social Enterprise Place initiative that's part of SE UK's work, to say, actually, hands up, we're a really interesting place here, we're doing something very different. Let's see if we can galvanise all that social value and see if collectively that we can make a difference, a bigger difference to those social issues in that area, and look at the social cohesion in the area. So using that social value and the commitment to the economic, the social and the environment issues in that area. So we got involved, we got the badge, and we had a big launch, and we did all the work. And clearly though, what we needed to understand was why that was happening in that area in Digbeth. Why was it becoming a social enterprise place? Why were social enterprises wanting to work there? Well, the obvious reason was economic. It was cheap, close to the city centre, and I think also other organisations have begun to realise that it was a place where there were a lot of social businesses, so they were keen to move into that area as well. But also the key thing was as well, they had access to good social enterprise development, and we aren't the only organisation that's based there, and Limited are based there, and the Digbeth Trust. So we launched it, and it was amazing how the organisations decided that they wanted to be committed, and actually they really got the point of, within an environment of declining budgets, to pull that social value that they could create was absolutely amazing. But what we needed to do was to understand what it looked like and what it was. And by that stage, we'd got over 50 social enterprises. So we were kind of, because they're working in isolation, there wasn't any one organisation responsible for mapping the social enterprise. Birmingham's a big city, there's a lot of social enterprise activity. So actually taking a focus in one area to look at how we can, if you like, have a virtual incubation process to help those organisations grow and create social value was going to be very powerful. So we need to do some research. So out of that 50, we had 33 responses, which we know is amazing, which just shows the commitment. But we found that they had an estimated turnover of over £20 million. And what we found as well was that it was quite easy to understand economically what Digbeth is creating in terms of Birmingham. We could understand which sectors they were operating in, what sizes. Sorry, it's very small, you might have to look at it later, but I'm supposed to do quite a short presentation. Lots of sectors, you can see they were all represented there in different colours, and some organisations operating in a number of different sectors. Different sizes of businesses, and one of the things we found was that there was a real issue around organisations needing to grow from about 4 years to 10 years, and it was slow, which helped us identify how to really focus in development activity to enable those organisations to achieve even greater social value. The real issue for us though has been, and it still continues to be, because we're just going back out now, because we've been doing this for a year, to understand what impact we've created in Digbeth, is how do you account for social value? So I'm picking up those issues that were mentioned in those first presentations this morning. Because all of these organisations create loads of social value. But how do you compare diverting young people from crime with support to those experiencing homelessness, addiction and substance misuse? How do you compare those who are doing work around training and access to employment with environmental work that's going on in the area, whereby they're looking at they're turning some of the derelict areas into gardens and growing food for the local people. So I think that's something that we've still got to work on, and we've still got to try and do a lot better. But the social value that those organisations are creating is absolutely amazing. What we're in the process now is, and we've set ourselves a target, is to look at how we're going to go forward. One of the things that's going to really help us in that is to use the income that we've, the value of the volunteering effort, which we reckon comes to over 84,000 hours a year. This is just in this small area, which we think is close to £1 million worth of volunteering effort that we're creating in that area. And we want to use that to match that against ESF, to do more work in the area to begin to address some of the social cohesion issues going forward. So we're really thinking outside the box. We've also had support from local banks, local businesses, the residents' associations involved. So this isn't something that's just about those social enterprises. This is something that's a collaborative effort. And I don't believe it would work if it wasn't collaborative and we weren't all buying into it. But we all believe that we can socially regenerate that area, address those issues of social cohesion and the environment, and really make a difference. We think we've had to do lots of things to make that happen, and those can't be underestimated. And I think that the people who are involved in it are very passionate about it and really believe in the future of Digbeth. We've done things like social enterprise markets for the local people so they can buy produce and items and so on. We've supported organisations to work together, to come into consortia, to bid for programmes. We think that we've made a 20% difference to the turnover of some of the organisations that we're supporting. So actually by collaborating together, not only to think about the geographical area, but working together, removing those barriers that we sometimes have in terms of competition, we can make a difference to the businesses, which then improve social value. We've got a framework for the next 5 years, and we're going to get there. It's going to be amazing. We get more and more social enterprises wanting to move into the area because they see that's the place to be and where all the kind of energy is, around social enterprise and innovation. So my call to action is have a think about doing things differently, collaborate in different ways so that we can really max out on the social value. We couldn't have done this without the support intellectually of Birmingham City Council, but no money. We've had no money to do this other than an Awards for All £10,000 grant. Everybody else has put their time and effort into this for free because they can see the future and see things are going. So go forward, collaborate and create social value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am genuinely inspired by all the wonderful work that's going on. There are a couple of things which I've taken out just to kind of helpfully summarise and frame the discussion. Austerity as a driver. The growth of social value is at least part of the answer to the problems that society is facing. The importance of local leadership, the importance of collaboration, and the breadth of what social value is achieving, not just across jobs and enterprise and apprenticeships, which is partly what you'd expect, but also poverty, health, crime, domestic value, homelessness, social cohesion. What I suggest is take questions in 3 and then let the panel answer them. Is that okay? We've got about 20 minutes, so if you could say your name and your organisation, that would be very helpful. Tom.
Hi, Tom Fox from Unlimited. Thanks for mentioning that.
Good.
Great to hear about all this work. Roberta, I had a question about, in your conversations with local authorities, those that have gone ahead with this, and as James said, austerity cuts have been part of the drive for that. I'm wondering if there's a tactical question here about helping local authorities really to see that this is about savings rather than cost, and maybe the language of or helping people to see that pooling budgets, having a longer term time frame in terms of considering costs and savings is actually perhaps a more palatable way, kind of the language that commissioners are perhaps more able to respond to. I wonder if actually we're doing ourselves a disservice by just talking about social value, and actually that might have a greater impact. And another question, if I may, to Rosie. You're talking about, I'm really interested in this kind of this dual local and social approach. And I wonder if you've come up against challenges where there's actually been a trade-off there. So as you said yourself, it's not always sensible to be buying locally. And I can imagine there'll be lots of situations where if you focus on local, you might actually be buying less social. How do you deal with that?
2-3 more questions, please.
I'm Lucy Armstrong. I work for an SME that works nationally with local authorities, and this is for Roberta mostly. We've recently tendered with Durham County Council, and I have to say I was really impressed with this time around how much change the procedure was, particularly in the contract specifying what social value that we had to come up against, and then also in the qualitative response for further suggestions of how we could add more value. But I wonder, because obviously I work for an SME, it's my responsibility writing bids to get the directors to come on board to invest socially in these things so that we win more business with the local authorities. And to do that, we kind of need to be held accountable. So if we win the contracts, is that going to be measured, and are they going to hold us to these things that we promised? Because a lot of our competitors will promise the earth but not deliver it, whereas we're actually going that extra amount to deliver it, and they're not maybe being chased for that to prove that.
And perhaps one more, or should we go to the questions, to the answers? Let's go to the panel.
Do you want to pick up first?
Okay. You know what I think about local authorities is that they are always looking for cost savings in the current environment. I mean, it obviously varies largely depending on the degree of cuts that they're experiencing. And I do think it struck me later that we need to be careful about, I was thinking, this is to myself, I need to be careful. Just because austerity is a driver of innovation doesn't mean that we think austerity is a good thing. I wish that we were able to apply the social value act when there is more money in the system, and when it would be easier to form the partnerships that we all want to see locally to deliver for local communities, and that we could be using all this creativity to develop new services and not just constantly have to think about how to do more with less. So I just thought I needed to say that. I think what's going on in terms of the Social Value Act is really inspiring actually, but I wish it was happening perhaps when there was more money to support some of the really excellent work that's going on. So I think it's a sort of you have to take a dual approach with local authorities, because they know that they are facing cuts, and they're always thinking about costs. What they don't always manage to create the space for is the sort of imaginative thinking and being creative and developing those partnerships. Although my experience is that the longer austerity goes on, the better they're getting at all of that, just because they have to, and they have to reach out and work with other partners. So, but it's also about, and whenever Rosie said about leadership, the most important thing is to have key champions, not only within local authorities, but within the local communities, that can bring everybody together and say, look, we can do this, and we can do it differently, and we can use all of this money. And sometimes, then it won't be a local contractor that they'll be using for whatever reason, but they should be using local contractors when it's possible to do that, and they should be ensuring that apprentices and apprenticeships are delivered, and that job opportunities are delivered, and that isn't just the cheapest all the time. And I think most of them are now getting to there. And so to take your point, I'm going to go and ask them. That is such a good question, right, I'm now going to go back to Durham and say, how are you monitoring that all of the social value outputs that you want in those contracts, how are you monitoring that they're being delivered?
And what's the penalty? If they
Yes, and what's the do they then go off the list if they're not delivered? So, you know, I just think that is such an interesting question, and I'm going to go and do something about that and get back to you.
Can I just elaborate a little bit on that as well? Because I know with Durham, they have the social value task force, and they've stood up the procurement managers, and they're so proud of these things
Oh,
they
yeah.
put in, and it is great, and they've given us, they've included SMEs in the county and suggested ways of doing it, which is brilliant. And so I think that they do monitor it for how they want to, but it's just, it's like you said, it's about penalties. It's about, you know, if you're in a framework and there's 3 providers and one is providing more social value, can you make it that a KPI so that they're going to get increased workloads because they're increasing the social value? That seems like a measurable approach.
Sarah, you wanted to leave
I just wanted to say that it is a brilliant question. The work that we were doing with Barrack Cadbury, we brought together procurement people from across the country, and twice we did that, had seminars, and twice the majority of the conversation was around measurement and what should be done. And I think it's easier to prove work because you can have photocopies of offers of employment and so on. But some of the other stuff that's less tangible, I think the economic things are much harder to prove, but the other stuff's really, really difficult. And what we've been hearing is that organisations have been putting amazing things forward that they're going to be achieving, and then it is, you say, like bid candy. So it's a challenge.
Rose?
In terms of some of the challenges around, when buying local is not the best kind of option, I think it's about, if you have to procure outside the local area, it's still about how do you derive the best social value from that organisation or that supplier. And it's about, I can actually give you an example. Everton Football Club, believe it or not, all their catering is done by a company called Adexu, which is a French company. They can't procure locally because they're tied into this multi-million-pound contract with them. But what we've got them to do now is to start to work with that company, to start to look at all the aspects of their supply chain, where they're recruiting their staff from, and all of those kind of things. So for me, it's about look, if that's the case, and there will be times where you can't procure locally, but that's about deriving the best social value out of where you have to procure from, but also to do the market engagement. So if there is a gap locally, how do you create an opportunity, and how does the public sector actually work with the business sector to try and bridge that gap, really?
Please.
Yeah, my name is Guy Battle from the Social Value Portal. I'm just picking up on a point that Deborah made about the survey information. We've just recently done a survey, actually, and what we did was we went to every single local authority website and asked ourselves, as if we were a business, I want to see your social value strategy, I want to understand what your outcomes you're asking for. And then if that wasn't available, we then sent a freedom of information request. Only 10% of local authorities actually have anything that is useful to business on the websites. Okay, central government have done the same. There is not one single central government department that has a social value strategy or set of metrics. If you go to CCS, Crown Commercial Services, who buy on behalf of Central, and what's your strategy? It doesn't exist. So I think there's a really interesting challenge around here, and part of that, part of the question is, if central government isn't doing it, and they're not holding themselves accountable, how on earth can local authorities be held accountable? Or where's the leadership? And I think this is a big issue. I think, so my question is, what do you think these 2 or 3 things that need to be delivered or developed that will help local authorities get through this kind of logjam of lack of resource or lack of understanding? That's the general question.
Is that meaty enough to take as a single question? Or would you like another question?
It's quite a big question.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 key points that might get through the logjam.
Shall I start with? I mean, in a way, I think it's really sad to hear that, given particularly the emphasis that this government has put on sort of changing central procurement, and you know, we have been monitoring this and wondering what change all of it has actually made, and in parallel, we have had a group sitting, a shadow procurement team. And so it's somebody from every single department, and we meet sort of every 4 or 5 months. So there's somebody there from, you know, our shadow health team, shadow justice team. I do the local government stuff, and that was being coordinated by our shadow cabinet office colleagues. And the reason for that was so that, and I was one of the people who was sort of driving that through, you can't go out and talk to local government as central government and have central government continue with its policies of not applying social value, not thinking what it's doing itself with public sector procurement. And so that's led to quite a strong offer from us about having social value clauses within central government departments. And I mean, we've made the policy documents make that quite clear, and I hope that would be delivered if that's possible, you know, depending on what happens in May. And I guess part of that would be trying to ensure that perhaps maybe the website is. I mean, we didn't do a website check, and it is often difficult finding out who actually does procurement in local government or elsewhere, but that again is quite a useful thing to put on the agenda, because there should be a clear way for people to understand that.
I don't think we'd have a logjam if actually the public sector took this seriously. We shouldn't have those kind of challenges. And certainly, you know, in Liverpool now, for the very first time, we've actually got new members of the procurement team who have actually got social value built into their job descriptions. So we're trying to open up as many avenues as possible for the business sector in its broader sense to be able to access all of that information. But it's kind of like a baby step, you know, step by step. And as a politician, I can sit in, I can say, you know, there's still too much, even in Liverpool. You know, there's still too much of the we can't do culture, you know, which we're challenging by actually doing the education that I referred to earlier with our own, you know, directors and teams, so that they buy into social value, and that then trickles down to other members of the, you know, the officer teams. But, you know, we just have to take it, we have to make sure that the public sector take it seriously.
Within the work that we've been doing in Birmingham, we took a really practical approach to try and get the different procurement teams to understand how they could implement the policy. And it was really simple things that we did. So, for example, if someone was doing mending the roads, then we helped them come up with some ideas around how they could create social value. Because actually, people, they're sort of wading through porridge, and they found it really, really difficult. So some really practical examples of how these things happen, develop some awareness, but also, and they go, oh yeah, actually, you know, we could buy that locally, and then that will create jobs. And oh yes, we can get the tar from such and such. I don't know about road building, but yeah, you know what I mean. And it's really not the social services that are being procured. It's a lot of the other services, like the paper, the road building, the street lights, and some of those kind of things. I think people are struggling with a lot more. So examples, I think some simple examples. I think peer learning, I think, is really good, so that teams come together and share. It doesn't have to be on a regular basis, but 2 or 3 occasions. We found that was really powerful, where they could talk through what the issues were and share ideas. And that kind of links to general awareness raising. But the real issue is this thing of measurement. And then, so they get to that stage, they can do that, and then they come back and go, oh, how do we measure? How do we compare? This isn't like with like. And I think until we've got that one sorted, it's
Can I just add to that, one of the best things that has come out of this whole journey over the last couple of years is that we've actually got procurement and commissioning talking to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like a light bulb moment,
Yeah.
you know, they're actually talking to each other. But that education process,
Yeah.
you know, that sort of thing that you've been talking about there,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we've done. And we've now got commissioners who are coming up to people like me and saying, I've got an idea around social value, do you think this will work? So they're really starting to grasp the nettle and start to think about it for themselves as well. So it's been about a landmark.
Have we got any questions at the back, perhaps? The lady and then the gentleman, please.
Hi, my name's Alison Simmers. I work for Norwood Dixon. I've been listening to a lot of things this morning, and we keep talking about cost savings. And I think my question is, isn't social value more about the impact that has rather than the cost saving? And if that's the case, how can that perhaps be taken into account more greatly? That's bad use of English, but in contract awarding?
And then the gentleman.
My question was Guy really earlier. Would it not help to have a social value regulator whose job it is to actually enforce the law?
Should we go straight across?
I think for me social value is both. It has the potential to make cost savings, but for me it's about the impact that it can have on communities. An example of that is we're currently doing a piece of work with Liverpool Mutual Homes. They came to me to say, look Rosie, we want to get more social enterprises into our supply chain, and we want to be driven by social value. So money is important, of course it is, but what we'd like to see is some ideas coming forward which actually have the maximum impact on our customers, our tenants. And so we're doing a unique piece of work at the moment that is actually putting impact before cash, which is, you know, really quite unusual. So for me, yeah, potential for cost saving, but it's got to be about impact, because I see social value as part of the solution to protecting our communities, and we can only do that by placing the emphasis on impact.
Thank you.
I'm going to echo that completely. I think for local authorities, it is partly about cost savings, but it's also a lot of the time just about using that money to have better outcomes, and particularly better outcomes for the local communities that local authorities are representing. And it's also helping them deliver for local businesses as well, and the third sector. So, you know, it's about those partnerships that local authorities are developing over time. But really, you know, what is the big driver is ensuring, particularly in communities that are very hard hit at the moment, that it's maybe providing apprenticeships that wouldn't come through any other route, and it is about giving access to employment and making sure that there's some money in the local economy. So I mean, I think impact is a big driver as well. And if I take the point about the regulator, I mean, certainly something needs to happen at central government level to some scrutiny to ensure that there is better use of public sector budgets to procure for local areas, and how we do that. I mean, there needs to be a real look at how to do that more effectively. I think I would be loath to do that to local government, because it just looks like, you know, a dead hand when actually it's local government that is really developing best practice here.
I think that just on the point of the regulator, I mean, I think before we could even get to that kind of point, we almost have to be self-regulating about the act as it is at the current time, and for me it's still far too woolly. You know, it's not got enough teeth, and I don't want to see the word consider I want to see the word thou shalt do, and I want to see, you know, not just contracts for 173,000 and 220,000, whatever it is for central government. I want to see all contracts have it applied for. So until we get to a point where the Act itself has got more teeth, I don't think we can start to regulate it other than doing that as ourselves, you know, as a sector, as communities, and holding people to account. And I think we need to empower our communities to challenge the politicians and to challenge our public services to say, what are you doing about social value? And I don't think we do that enough either, if I'm being honest.
I can't add much more to that, but what I will say is that it's a fantastic question again. Because if you talk to some procurement people, and again it might be the road building people, they are interested in the cost savings because they don't really get what social value they can create. But if you talk to people who are commissioning social services, and health services and so on, they're much more interested in better outcomes, and they are challenging organisations to deliver things more effectively and want to know that the money that they're putting into those services is really making a difference. So I think it's still all to play for in a way. I wouldn't say it was about cost savings. I think it's about better outcomes, and I would, in all the work we do, want to be encouraging people to think that way. And you are also seeing different weightings coming forward now from some procurement officers who are saying, right, we're going to put 20% on social value, whereas, you know, another procurement person might put 2%. So it, you know, I think it really depends what you're tendering for, who the officer is, what their understanding is, and it's still got a way to go.
I think there's an element of actually trying to remind people that actually social value is nothing new.
No.
You know, it's being portrayed as if it's a new concept. Well, it isn't. It's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And, you know, certainly in Liverpool, we've got numerous examples of social value happening back in the 1800s and before that. So I think there's a challenge there, you know, that social value is around us and has been for decades, hundreds, you know, so it's nothing new.
Okay, we've got time for just one very quick last question from the lady in the back.
Jean Jarvis, furniture scheme. I was one of the ambassadors with Peter Holcomb, which you mentioned this morning. And when social enterprise, which had been going for a very long time indeed before it actually became recognised, and there was an element of people jumping on the bandwagon, and I just think with the social value, which as you say has been around for thousands of years, but what happens is people jump on the bandwagon, and so I think that there needs to be, yes, it needs to be measured and there needs to be regulation, but it also needs to be weighted because, you know, like, you know, it's good to have people that work in for you that live 10 miles away, that's great, but there's something else that could be much bigger than that, and there needs to be some scale of it so that you can't just say social value and it could mean a whole range of things. So it's just a word of caution.
Any thoughts on weighting?
Well, we've started to introduce weighting into our tenders because social value is in every single tender now that goes out. There's a social value statement which sets a benchmark about what social value is, because we can't make the assumptions that particularly some of the smaller businesses understand what that is. And then there's a weighting of sort of between 5, 10, 15%. And I know that Knowsley, which is one of the neighbouring boroughs, they started to introduce weighting in, because then it starts to have a value, you know, which you can measure against.
It's the same in Birmingham. There's weighting, but I absolutely agree with you, Jean, because sometimes it's the emperor's new clothes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the issue for social enterprises and charities and third sector organisations is that they've been doing it for a long time, but they haven't necessarily been good at articulating it. And but also in these times of austerity, it is very good if we can get other partners, delivery partners in the private sector and public sector to contribute more, and I think then that's going to result in better outcomes for our clients.
And we're often doers, not measurers, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's the thing, social enterprise, and that's where we need to get that right.
But we need to get better at telling our story.
We do, yeah.
Can I just add one thing that I agree with you that, you know, a lot of, and I thought this about big society, you know, haven't we been doing this for forever? But two things that have changed. that have made it easier for local government to think about social value in terms of its procurement and commissioning is the Social Value Act and the change to the EU directive. And that has been enormously important in just helping local authorities work their way through how they might deliver more social value, because before these changes they just find it too difficult.
Well, thank you. If we give the panel members a round of applause. And thank you very much for coming. I'm now obliged to tell you you've got lunch and networking and marketplace downstairs in the ground floor.
James, do you have?
Thank you very much. I enjoyed
Thank
that.
you. Can we get can I get their presentation? So they're going to be sent to us.